On our newscast tonight, a much-anticipated plenary session was convened at Korea's National Assembly, but only for a short while. The ruling party's floor leader offers his resignation. Top diplomats of Korea and Japan discussed the possibility of holding bilateral summit talks. Seoul says Tokyo should first sincerely apologize for its past wartime atrocities. The global coalition against threats from Islamic State militants gains momentum as more countries join in on airstrikes in Iraq. Stay tuned for these stories and more coming right up on Early Edition at 6. It's 6 in the evening on Friday, September 26th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Laah Hyun-kyung.
And I'm Daniel Choy. Thank you for joining us. We begin at the National Assembly, where no bills have been passed for months.
That's right. The ruling party was determined to pass dozens of pending bills at today's plenary session, with or without the opposition that was. But the parliamentary speaker had something else in mind.
Our Ji Myung-kil starts us off.
The 153 lawmakers of the ruling Saenuri Party who showed up to Friday's plenary session did so expecting to pass some 90 pending bills, even though lawmakers of the main opposition party continued their boycott of all parliamentary proceedings. Assembly Speaker Chung Ui-hwa was welcomed with applause upon entering the plenary floor, but their cheers quickly changed to surprise.
As the governing party, we have a duty to pass legislative bills and government budgets in a proper manner with the cooperation of the opposition party. Although you are here, I ask for your forgiveness as I am adjourning today's session until September 30th.
At that session, Chung said more pending bills should be brought to the floor in addition to the 91 draft bills that have already been approved by related parliamentary committees. Chung also endorsed a proposal that next year's government budget be voted on at the National Assembly no later than December 2nd, and called for setting a specific timetable for its annual audit of the government. Ruling party floor leader Lee Won-gu had another surprise in store. He offered his resignation to take responsibility for not being able to normalize parliamentary affairs, but ruling party chairman Kim Moo-sung declined to accept it. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy plans to open a general meeting this weekend, where they will seek to reach a compromise on the upcoming parliamentary proceedings and decide whether they will attend next Tuesday's plenary session. Ji Myung-kil, Arirang News.
And that situation at the National Assembly is what President Park Geun-hye returned to this Friday following a week-long overseas trip to Canada and the United States for this year's UN General Assembly. Our Kwon So-ah has a wrap-up of the high-profile meetings she attended.
President Park Geun-hye began her high-profile visits to Canada and New York, seeking understanding from the international community for her policies. And the presidential office of Cheongwade says she was successful in doing that. In her debut at the UN General Assembly in New York, President Park sought international support for her North Korea and unification policies. She also highlighted the gravity of North Korea's human rights abuses. At high-level meetings over global issues, including climate change, terrorism, and education, President Park promoted Korea's contributions as a major middle power and vowed to expand its role even more. Prior to her trip to New York, President Park made a state visit to Canada, where the biggest achievement was elevating bilateral ties to a strategic partnership through the signing of a bilateral free trade pact. It is Canada's first such agreement with a nation in the Asia-Pacific. The president's overseas schedule was packed, but there's just as much to do back in Seoul. The National Assembly remains deadlocked over a special law meant to investigate April's Seoul ferry disaster, and a number of bills intended to jumpstart the economy remain pending as well. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Now, President Park Geun-hye and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe have yet to sit down for a one-on-one. Foreign ministers of Korea and Japan held talks in New York on the sidelines of that UN General Assembly on Thursday to talk about the prospects of a bilateral summit. Our Foreign Affairs Ministry correspondent Hwang Seong-hee reports.
Meeting for the second time in less than 2 months on Thursday, Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se and his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida agreed to work on repairing their strained ties. Yoon stressed Japan's sincere efforts to heal the wounds of the so-called comfort women is essential. He expressed concerns over Tokyo's recent backpedaling on its past apologies to the Korean women who suffered at the hands of the Japanese army. Kishida reaffirmed Japan has no plans to revise the Kono Statement, a landmark apology to the comfort women that was issued in 1993. The meeting came just days after Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe sent a personal letter to President Park Geun-hye, officially expressing his wish for a summit later this fall. The two diplomats are thought to have discussed the details of a possible summit in November on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Beijing. That would be the first bilateral meeting between the two leaders, as President Park has refused to meet with Abe before he apologizes for Japan's wartime atrocities. But before any summit can take place, analysts say Japan must show it's serious.
To make an apology, you need to give it once with sincerity. And I think that the Korean people have come to doubt the expressions of remorse and regret from Japan because of other statements that have been made.
And on the part of Korea, experts say Seoul must be ready to accept an apology from Japan when the time comes. Hwang Seong-hee, Arirang News.
The U.S. Special Representative for North Korea policy begins a week-long trip to Asia this weekend. Glenn Davis will start off in China and then arrive in Seoul on Tuesday for talks with his South Korean counterpart, Hwang Jun-guk, before finishing up in Japan. U.S. diplomatic sources say the visits are part of routine consultations among member nations of the six-party talks aimed at stopping North Korea's nuclear development. Davis will be accompanied on the trip by Sidney Seiler, the newly appointed U.S. Special Envoy for the six-party nuclear talks. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un not appearing at the regime's second Supreme People's Assembly meeting of this year yesterday is generating wild rumors about his health. The last time he was seen in public was some 3 weeks ago. Our Shin Se-min has this report.
It was a no-show for the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un at the 13th Supreme People's Assembly held on Thursday, and the absence is fueling speculations about his health. The young leader Kim, who has not been seen in public since September 3rd, missed a meeting for the first time since he took power in 2011. Several weeks of absence has stirred up questions about Kim's possible health problems, as he has been seen walking with a limp in recent news reports released by the state media. North Korea, however, replaced its Vice Chairman Choi Ryong-hae of the National Defense Commission to Hwang Byung-seo, the director of the all-powerful General Political Bureau of Pyongyang's Korean People's Army. Choi, once a key confidant of North Korean leader, succeeding Kim's uncle Chang Song-taek, has been dismissed from his seat. The day-long meeting has brought together some 650 delegates to approve some of the key public policy and legal measures, along with overhauling the country's mandatory schooling and conscription systems. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, we are a week into Asia's biggest sporting event, the 17th Asian Games, currently underway in Incheon. So let's check out the latest.
For that, we turn to our Song Ji-sun at the news center. Ji-sun, the talk of the town when it comes to archery is, of course, Korea's women's team, not just for training with snakes in their pants or breaking the lens in the bullseye many a times.
Right, they've been making history in each games, and this time after setting a world record in the compound team event, the female archers are after the recurve team gold. Now, the South Korean women's recurve archery team moved on to the team final after outshooting their Indian opponents 6-0 and the set score at the semifinals. Team Korea's goal of winning a 9th consecutive gold medal in the men's event, however, failed as the men's squad lost to China with a set score of 4-5 in the semis. The two teams were tied until the last shoot-off, but the ticket for the final went to China as they shot closer to the bullseye. The men's squad will go against Japan for the bronze medal, while the women's squad will fight for the gold against China on Sunday. And now on to some man who's earned the most medals here at this year's Asian Games so far. In what most people thought was going to be a battle or rival match between Korea's Park Tae-hwan and Chinese Sun Yang in swimming, Japan's new star, Kosuke Hagino, stole the spotlight, bagging 7 medals. 4 of them are gold. And Hagino, who just turned 20 last month and is only 777 centimeters tall, set 3 Asian Games record in his debut at the Games, proving himself to be the continent's best all-around swimmer from medley to relay. In a press conference after winning medals in all the events he entered in, Hagino said he is setting his sights higher on breaking new records, but added it is also important to achieve smaller goals step by step and enjoy swimming. He in fact, has been swimming ever since he was only 6 months old.
Well, I mean, some say that it's worth pointing out that Hagino said his role model was Michael Phelps and not Park Tae-hwan nor Sun Yang for that matter. So he may be hinting that he wants to be tops in the world, not just in Asia. Right.
Well, if you recall, in 2006, Park Tae-hwan was 17 only when he made a big splash. And we're hoping that he can really add a little exclamation mark before he ends his legacy in this Asian Games.
Right. He has been actually making history in each of the Games, and for someone like Park Tae-hwan, is the last of competition for sports like swimming, and Park Tae-hwan is obviously looking to grab 2 more medals if possible this Friday night in the 1500-meter freestyle and 4x100-meter medley relay. If he does add just 1 more medal, he will be the new record holder for the most medals won in the Asian Games for a Korean athlete. We also have the men's round of 16 in football and the women's quarterfinals, in which Team Korea will play against Chinese Taipei at 8 p.m. And for those of you who are wanting to catch these actions on the scene, some tickets are still available for many of these events, so do try visiting Incheon if you're in the area or just wanting to visit the site. And moving on, Korea has taken its number 2 spot back from Japan on this Friday after previously dropping to number 3. Let's take a look at the top 10 standings as of this evening.
Shifting gears, U.S. authorities say they identified the masked IS militant involved in the beheading of Western hostages. Now this, as British Prime Minister David Cameron awaits the country's parliament approval for joining the U.S.-led coalition against the Islamic State militants. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
The U.S.-led coalition fighting Islamic State militants in Iraq and Syria is making some progress. During a briefing with reporters in Washington, FBI Director James Comey said that the U.S. has determined the identity of the militant who beheaded 2 American journalists and a British aid worker in Syria. But he would not be drawn on releasing his name to the media just yet. The videotaped beheadings of Americans James Foley and Steven Sotloff were major factors in U.S. President Barack Obama's decision to strike IS militarily, with the group's main strongholds in Syria the main targets of U.S. airstrikes this week. The Pentagon on Thursday released a video of its airstrikes against the Mayadeen module refinery, a target that's under IS control in eastern Syria. Attacks on oil refineries are intended to undermine the group's ability to finance itself from oil sales. The U.S.-led coalition to fight the extremist group is gaining momentum, as Britain announced on Thursday that it would join. Prime Minister David Cameron is waiting for Parliament to grant its official approval. Other Western allies of the U.S., including France, Australia, Belgium, and the Netherlands, have agreed to join the airstrikes in Iraq. But despite these developments, the Pentagon says it's too early to say whether the U.S.-led coalition is winning against the IS. A spokesperson pointed to Islamic State's continued access to financing, volunteers, and weapons, even after the aerial bombing campaign against them began last month. 김지연, Arirang News.
The official death toll from Ebola in West Africa is fast approaching 3,000. The World Health Organization confirmed that number. A high-level meeting on the Ebola outbreak took place at the UN headquarters in New York on Thursday local time. UN Chief Ban Ki-moon said a 20-fold boost in aid was needed. As World Bank President Ji Myung-kil said, his group would nearly double its financial commitment to $400 million to get urgently needed staff and resources to the affected areas. Now, one of the hardest hit West African states, Sierra Leone, sealed off another district in a desperate move to contain the epidemic, placing some 1/3 of its populace under quarantine.
Korea and China are still divided over a number of sensitive issues in their bilateral free trade agreement talks. The two hope to wrap up negotiations by the end of this year. But is that a feasible plan? Our Kim Min-ji has the details of the 13th round of FTA negotiations between Korea and China.
The latest round of talks on a Korea-China free trade agreement came to an end Friday, and while some progress was made, the two sides remain divided over some highly sensitive issues. In the 13th round of negotiations held in Beijing, the two sides discussed a range of topics from products to services and investment. There were compromises made with customs issues such as exempting shipments of less than $700 from submitting a certificate of origin. They also agreed to complete customs procedures on shipments within 48 hours of arrival. But differences do remain. Korea wants China to lift tariffs on Korean manufacturing products in the early stages of implementation, and China wants the Korean market open for agricultural products. Neither side has been willing to budge on those issues. The two countries have now so far agreed on 4 of 22 chapters for their FTA and are nearing compromises in several other chapters, including economic cooperation. Korea's trade ministry said the two sides have yet to decide on a date for their next round of talks. President Park Geun-hye and Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed in talks earlier this summer to wrap up FTA talks by the end of this year. China is Korea's biggest trading partner in terms of both imports and exports. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Korea's consumer sentiment remained flat in September. The Bank of Korea says the country's consumer sentiment index stood at 107 in September, unchanged from the previous month. The figure remains below the 108 level recorded just before the ferry sinking. And with that, some experts are questioning the effects of the government's stimulus measures. The monthly index reflects the overall economic outlook of consumers, their living conditions, and future spending plans. A reading above 100 means optimists outnumber pessimists.
Not a year has gone by without strikes over pay at Hyundai Motor and its sister company Kia Motors in the past few years. Now, this year alone, Hyundai has recorded losses of over $1 billion due to those strikes, and the company is still dealing with another. Hwang Ji-hye tells us more.
Another round of strikes over contentious wage talks began earlier this week following Hyundai Motor Group's $10 billion purchase of land in Seoul. That follows a similar partial walkout at the conglomerate last month that cost Hyundai Motor and affiliate Kia Motors more than $1 billion. Over the past few years, strikes over pay negotiations have hit the automakers' factories at home, even though their wages are among the highest in the automotive industry. But local Hyundai factories have the worst productivity compared to those abroad. While it takes around 30 hours to produce one automobile in Korea, a factory in the U.S. can do the same job in less than 15 hours. Experts say although strikes are means to improve work conditions, those that go on for a prolonged period of time could hurt the company's overall competitiveness. They add that strikes could lead to fewer employment opportunities in the domestic economy, as the automaker might move factories overseas to cut down on costs. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
The makeup of Korean households today looks different than it did some 20 years ago. Up are the numbers of 1- and 2-person households, so much so that they comprise nearly half of all households now in the country. Our Kim Yeon-bin explains the shift.
The number of 1- and 2-person households has risen drastically over the past 2 decades, as socioeconomic factors and perspectives on family values have changed. According to a report released Friday by the Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs, just 9% of Korean households were single-person households in 1990. As of 2010, the figure has shot up to 24%. Over the same period, the percentage of two-person homes has gone up 10 percentage points to 24%. With their numbers on the rise, 4-person and 5-person households have declined, down 7 and 20 percentage points respectively. Adding all up, and nearly half of all households in Korea are now composed of either 1 or 2 people, more than double the figure from 1990. 4- and 5-person households accounted for 58% of the total in 1990. By 2010, it was down to 31%. The nation's low birth rate has been blamed in part for the shift. In 1997, 74% of Korean surveys said it was a necessity to have kids. Just 46% answered yes to that same question in 2012. The sentiment is reflected in the birth numbers. An average Korean household in the early 90s had 2.2 children. By 2012, that number has shrunk to 1.16. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Well, the second batch of countries that will begin selling Apple's new iPhone 6 and 6 Plus is out, but Korea is not on that list. And some here in Korea are saying that it might be because of Samsung.
Right, the rivalry and the fierce battle between the two continues, hopefully not in the court of law. A curve not bent, that's the tweet sent from the account of Korean smartphone maker Samsung Electronics on Thursday, along with a picture of its soon-to-be-released Galaxy Note Edge.
Well, that's a clear knock on the recent troubles that rival Apple has had with the newly released iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus. Now, some users have complained that their smartphones were bending under pressure.
Apple, which sold more than 10 million iPhone 6 models in its first weekend of sales, responded to the recent complaints in a statement. It said their phones do not bend under normal use and that just 9 customers have contacted the company complaining of the problem. And now the weather.
Yes, the weather. For that, we turn to Michelle Park at the Weather Center. Michelle?
Good evening, guys, and happy Friday. It is the last weekend of the month, and favorable weather awaits us with temperatures in the mid-20s for most regions with chilly mornings and nights. Now, enjoy this weather while you can, because starting next week, more rain is in the forecast for some regions. Also, temperatures will be dropping even more into the low 20s. Now, as for the weather conditions at the Asian Games in Incheon, the current temperature is at 22 degrees. The weather for tomorrow looks very similar as well, putting the highs at 25 and lows in the high teens. Now, going over to our temperature readings for tomorrow. So we'll start off the Saturday morning at 17 before reaching up to 26 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will see highs of 28 and 27 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island peaks at 27, while Dokdo hits 23, while Wangkeugang stays at 25. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and have a wonderful evening.
Well, that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you for staying with us. If you're tuning in from different time zones, as always, have a wonderful day. This has been Daniel Choy.
And I'm Laah Hyun-kyung, wishing our viewers a wonderful weekend wherever you are. We will be back at the same time on Monday. Bye-bye.